So let's begin. Um, Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's program, Inquisitions and Executions in the Archive. As Stacy mentioned, I'm Maureen Plinsky. I am the Assistant Archivist at the Chester County Archives, and I will be highlighting specific records related to debt collection at the archives. Before we get started, I just want to remind you that there is still time to join one of the Chester County History Center's upcoming walking tours, including Chilling Westchester, a dark history walking tour, or a walking tour of the historic Oakland Cemetery, and finally, an architectural history walking tour of Westchester. To register for any or all of these tours, please visit the Chester County History Center's event page. Finally, if you have any questions during the program, feel free to drop them in the chat box. And as I'm going through this program, I will be shutting my video off. So let's see. So you can see the slides. Okay. So before I dig into our records, I would like to share a little bit about the history of the archives. The archives began in 1982, the year of the county's tricentennial, when a partnership was established between the County of Chester and the Chester County Historical Society, which is now, of course, the History Center. The goal of this partnership was and continues to be to preserve and make available the historic records of the Chester County government. Located at the Government Services Center in Westchester, the Chester County Archives holds over 3,500 cubic feet of original public records, of which roughly 40% has been digitized. It's important to note that county records are collected and maintained following Pennsylvania state law, which means that county governments did not create and keep records unless mandated to do so. So today we are digging into one specific collection at the archives, our Inquisition and execution records. We hold Inquisition papers from 1700 to 1800. Our execution papers start as early as 1696 and end in 1900. And we have execution dockets from 1801 to 1945. We have not digitized these records, but they are available in our physical collections. So you're always welcome to call, email, or visit us to request or view these records. Fortunately, we have indexed a portion of this collection so that you can easily search the collection. You can access the index by visiting the county website at chesco.org. And we are listed under the Departments tab, Archives and Records. You can click Records, Guides, and Indexes on our homepage, and that will send you to all of the collections that we have indexed. So for this program, for the sake of Inquisition and executions, those would be listed under our civil court and debt-related records. And as you can see, Inquisitions and executions, we have indexed these from 1700 to 1800. Later in this program, our head archivist, Stacy, she will share how you can find records in this collection that were created after 1800. So to begin the big question, what is an inquisition or execution? These were steps in the debt collection process. If a landowner could not pay off their debts, the county sheriff summoned 12 men to view the land and determine whether the profits from the land could cover the debts within 7 years. And this process is referred to as the Inquisition. If the land was not profitable enough, to pay off this debt in 7 years, the Court of Common Pleas issued a writ of execution, which directs the county sheriff to seize the land and sell it to the highest bidder. So the Court of Common Pleas, they followed a strict process before deciding whether a property could or reach the inquisition or execution process. So the court first issued a precipe, which was a written order commanding that a person appear in court. Then they issued a writ, which notified a resident that they were being sued. The plaintiff then filed their complaint to the court, and the case could go to trial. It was also quite common for the plaintiff and defendant to come to an agreement out of court. So we wouldn't see those records within our collections. But if the case continued to trial, the court then decided whether the debtor was liable. And if they were, the court issued an execution of judgment, which was the legal process by which the court enforced its decision. Only at this point was a writ of inquisition or execution issued. So, as I mentioned, the writ of inquisition ordered a jury of 12 men to view the property and determine whether the land's profits could cover the debts within 7 years. If the land was seen as profitable, the debtor could then rent or work the land to cover the payments that they owed. But if the land was not profitable, the court issued a writ of execution to seize and sell the land. If the debts were still not covered after the sale of land, the debtor may submit a petition to the Court of Common Pleas to argue for their debts to be forgiven. The court also sentenced debtors to prison. So this is the petition for Joseph Buffington. This was filed in 1767. And Buffington was committed to the common gaol of this county after he was unable to pay his debt of £4 and 13 shillings to Peter Steele. And Buffington will be a name that pops up again later in this program. As we'll see, this was not the only time he was summoned to court to address unpaid debts. And as an example, to the left is a photo of the debtor's wing of the Moyamensing prison in Philadelphia. Interestingly enough, there is a Chester County connection. This prison was designed by the architect Thomas U. Walter, who also designed many notable Chester County buildings, including the Chester County Courthouse in Mink. But at the time of Buffington's petition in 1767, he was likely held at the prison in Chester. So as I mentioned, debt cases were heard by the Court of Common Pleas. And the court, it was among the earliest institutions to govern the region, formed from the Court of Upland. So before Pennsylvania was even a state or a colony, the region was governed by the Upland Court. During the mid-1600s, cases, whether they be civil, criminal, or debt-related, were tried at the Upland Court, which was located in present-day Chester. The court functioned within the House of Defense, which stood along the Delaware River. When King Charles II of Great Britain granted the province of Pennsylvania to William Penn in 1681, the Court of Upland was overseen by the newly formed provincial government. And the oldest record at the archives is an entry from September 13th, 1681. So before Penn even stepped into Pennsylvania. And that entry documents the first case that was heard at the Court of Upland under this provincial government. In 1707, the governor of Pennsylvania, John Evans, passed an ordinance for establishing of courts, which reorganized the colony's judicial system. It designated the Superior Provincial Court as the Supreme Court and divided the county courts into criminal and civil. And these were referred to as the Court of Quarter Sessions and what we're focused on today, the Court of Common Pleas. Throughout the following centuries, other courts were created, but this general structure was preserved. The civil cases heard by the Chester County Court of Common Pleas were mainly personal suits, which included the recovery of debts or the enforcement of a contract, as we'll shortly see, and the court also oversaw land disputes. In 1724, the Chester County Courthouse was built in Chester. It was initially convenient to have the courthouse here, considering that many early settlers resided a short distance from the Delaware River. And also, just to quickly note, at this time, what is now considered Delaware County was part of Chester County. It wasn't until 1789 that Delaware County formed. So as more settlers moved to the quote-unquote backcountry, it became necessary to build a courthouse in Westchester. And the Westchester Courthouse was built in 1786. So when the executors of Joseph Few, who were from West Bradford Township, were summoned to court in 1763, they were required to go all the way to Chester. So Joseph Few, he was a yeoman farmer and cooper from West Bradford Township. From 1754 to 1761, Few acquired and sold multiple properties in West Bradford through 3 separate mortgages. Though by the time Few passed away in 1761, he had not paid off these mortgages. We can follow Few's story and his debts through the records at the archives. So Few first appears in the West Bradford tax record in 1732. He was taxed £1, 6 shillings. And as we follow him through the tax record, we can see that the tax steadily increases. Unfortunately, tax records prior to 1765 only include the rate, which was the amount a resident paid. After 1765, tax records include the return, which was a list of taxable property owned by residents. Although these taxes for Few does not describe the property that he owned, it reveals that his estate became more profitable over the years. So from 1754 to 1761, Few signed a mortgage for 3 separate properties in West Bradford Township. On August 3rd, 1754, William Pyle was bound unto the said Joseph Few in the sum of £42 for nearly 160 acres in West Bradford. Pyle was required to pay Few £21 plus interest by August of the following year, or he risked losing his claim to the land. Before Few mortgaged this land, it was owned by a Bartholomew Bird. So to the left, that is the property as it shows up in the 1749 survey held by the Pennsylvania State Archives. On March 4th, 1761, Joseph Few agreed to pay Charles Norris, a merchant from Philadelphia, £200 plus interest for 200 acres in West Bradford. So this is the property that was mortgaged by Few as it appears on our 1777 property atlas. Few entered another mortgage with Norris on November 11th, 1761. This time, Few agreed to pay £600 plus interest for 600 acres in West Bradford. And again, if Few failed to pay, the mortgage would cease and he would lose his claim to the land. So shortly after Few agreed to pay Norris a combined £800 for these 2 tracts of land, Few unexpectedly passed away. He was survived by his widow, Mary Aston, and their 3 children, Mary, Hannah, and Joseph. Few's son-in-law, who I mentioned earlier, Joseph Buffington, he was married to Few's eldest daughter, Mary. He acted as the executor. So as Few's executor, Buffington was responsible for settling Few's debts. And as Stacy will share soon, he had quite a few debts. And in February 1763, Norris sued Buffington, who he claimed refused to pay the £600 and £200 mortgages that Few agreed to shortly before his death. In August 1764, perhaps in an effort to cover these debts, Buffington sued William Pyle, who he said refused to pay the £42 Pyle agreed to in the 1754 mortgage. After Norris sued Buffington and Buffington was found liable for these debts, the Court of Common Pleas issued a writ of inquisition. 12 men viewed 350 acres that were included in the suit, and they found that, quote, the clear profits of the said messuages, lands, and premises are not sufficient within the space of 7 years to satisfy the debts and damages in the said writs mentioned. So Few had too much debt for the profits of this land to cover the cost. So this land was sent to execution. Before I switch off to Stacy, who will dig more into the execution process, I just want to quickly highlight some of the collections at the archives that may also document a debt case. As I mentioned before, we hold Inquisition papers, execution papers, and execution dockets in our physical collections. We have also digitized our appearance dockets, continuous dockets, and court dockets, which include entries for debt cases. Our court dockets start as early as 1714, and our appearance dockets end as late as the 1970s. So whether you're researching a debt case that was tried in the 18th or 20th century, our records may be useful for your research. And you can access these collections by clicking the Digitized Records tab on our website. Thank you so much, and I'll pass it on to Stacy, who will talk about our execution papers.
Thank you, Maureen. Just bear with us one moment while Maureen stops sharing, and I will share. There we are. Okay. Can everybody see that? There we go. All right.
Looks good.
Perfect. So as Maureen had mentioned, the term execution is what we're going to be covering today. And it officially referred to as an execution of judgment. And it not only functions as the first step after the Court of Common Pleas rendered a judgment, but also as a final step in the debt case when a defendant was only able to satisfy the debt by selling real estate. And that, again, is what we're going to be covering today. Only those executions which seized real estate, also referred to as the writ of execution, which led to an execution of a deed poll, or as we refer to it today, a sheriff's sale of the seized property. Maureen showed you how to access the indexes to the archive's Inquisition and execution records. And here is a page from the index that points you to the records related to Joseph Few. Maureen highlighted the Inquisition filed in August of 1763 at the suit of Charles Norris of Philadelphia. By November of 1763, the writ of execution was issued, but it had changed, the defendant's name had changed from Few to Buffington. And as Maureen mentioned, Buffington was the executor of the estate of Joseph Few. So looking at the other records that we have here at the archives, Maureen showed you the Orphans Court decedent estate, but there's also a will and administration file for Joseph Few, who died in 1761 intestate, which means he didn't have a will. And that isn't too surprising, given that they lived approximately 25 miles from West Bradford to the Chester Courthouse. So there's the administration. And here's actually the administration bond taken out by Joseph Buffington and Mary, his wife, the daughter of Joseph Few. But since inquisitions and executions are part of the civil court process, it's important to trace a civil suit from its inception. To trace the case from its beginning, you can locate records in the Court of Common Pleas appearance dockets. These dockets record by court term any return of a writ, as well as the appearance of new cases before the Court of Common Pleas. Digitized dockets from 1728 to 1808 are available for you to view through the Archives Laserfiche portal. Thankfully, the first pages of each docket contains an index, which is organized alphabetically by the last name of each plaintiff. To search by defendant's last name, there is a separate index available, and that is called an adverse index. Shown here is the page from the appearance docket recording the suit of Charles Norris in two separate actions against Joseph Buffington. The total amount that Norris was seeking, as Maureen had mentioned, was £800, in addition to the cost of the lawsuit. Finally, critical information is included in the appearance docket, and that is the case number. Here, case number 31, case number 32, which is used to locate any papers related to the case. Here is an image of the archives index for the Common Pleas narratives identifying the case against Joseph Few and illustrating how the case numbers 31 and 32 that we saw in the appearance docket are directly linked to Charles Norris's narratives. These are the two narratives, also known as declarations, given the reasons why Charles Norris, the plaintiff, was suing the estate of Joseph Few for the unpaid £200 and £600 mortgages that Maureen mentioned. You might also learn more about the circumstances, and here Charles Norris asserts that the said Joseph Few in his lifetime did altogether refuse, and Joseph Buffington and Mary, his wife, also refused to render, they have denied, and still do deny, to repay the debt. The appearance docket also provides the final disposition of the case. Buffington, through his attorney, acknowledged that he cannot gainsay and confesses judgment to the plaintiff on May 25th of 1763. 6 months later, on November 29th, 1763, a venditione exponas was issued, abbreviated as VENEX, and literally meaning "you exposed to sale." This writ of execution required the sheriff to sell land to satisfy debt. Specifically, the sheriff was ordered to expose to sale 2 certain messuages, plantations, and tracts of land situate in West Bradford, to satisfy the debt Joseph Few owed to Charles Norris. The first tract of land consisted of 200 acres, and the second of 150 acres. The Venex also cites the Inquisition that Maureen mentioned earlier. Subsequent to the Venex, one of the properties was purchased by John Carpenter, who paid £646 for the messuage and the 150-acre tract of land. £646 not only covered one of the mortgages, but also the cost of Charles Norris's suit. The Court of Common Pleas docket records that the sheriff, John Fairlamb, appeared before the court to duly acknowledge the deed poll, transferring the messuage and 150 acres of land to John Carpenter. The second property, consisting of the messuage and 200 acres, was sold to John Young of West Bradford, who offered £191 and was the highest and best bidder, and that being the greatest and best price. This sale was also recorded in the Court of Common Pleas court docket, as you see here. In this early time period, land executions sold via sheriff's deeds are recorded in Chester County's deed books, which have been indexed to 1871 and are searchable by both seller or grantor, as well as buyer or grantee. Here we see the deed references for the few properties. In addition to finding the evidence of land executions in deed books and court dockets, mortgage books will record the satisfaction of the mortgage. Shown here are the two recorded mortgages between Joseph Few and Charles Norris. Along the outer edge of each page is a signed statement from Charles Norris declaring that he had received of John Fairlamb, Sheriff of Chester County, full satisfaction for both principal and interest due on this mortgage in discharge thereof, dated August 3rd, 1764, thereby ending a 15-month-long process since Norris first petitioned the court. But what makes Joseph Few's Inquisition and execution such a remarkable example to share with you is that Few's death in 1761 provides us with a snapshot of his financial situation. This inventory reveals that Joseph Few lived quite well for the 1760s, having a purse and apparel appraised at over £93, furniture, including a desk, bookcase, buffet, tables, a clothes press, a spice box, and a feather bed. Housewares, such as 36 Delft plates and 2 sets of teaware, in addition to 2 sets of china, kettles, pots, and 6 silver teaspoons. The rest of the inventory identifies a large Bible and other books, fabrics, farm tools and crops, livestock, and even a quantity of turnips. However, Joseph Few's Orphans Court estate file reveals that Few also owed quite a bit of money to quite a few people, in addition to Charles Norris, which explains why Few's land was seized to settle his mortgage debt. As we saw with Joseph Few, early sheriff's deeds were recorded by the recorder of deeds in deed books and entered into common pleas dockets. Beginning in August of 1773 until May of 1905, Chester County's prothonotary, which is the clerk of the civil court, began recording deed polls or sheriff's deeds. Property researchers might encounter a sheriff's deed when creating a chain of title to trace property ownership. Pictured here is a photo of a property on Westtown Thornton Road in Thornbury Township and a sample chain of title tracing the ownership of the property via deeds until 1879, when the property was purchased through sheriff's sale. This deed, dated February 25th, 1879, records the sale of the property from Jarvis Mason and his wife Eliza to H. Elric Sproat. For anyone unfamiliar with the property research process, deeds are comprised of three distinct parts: the introduction, which identifies who is involved in the transaction; the metes and bounds, which identifies what the property is and where it is located; and finally, a deed hopefully includes a recital clause, which identifies how the property was acquired by the seller. Fortunately, this recital clause not only cites the reference to the sheriff deed for the Masons' purchase of the property at sheriff's sale, but also provides the reference to the previous title for the person who actually lost it due to the land execution. Here is the sheriff's deed conveying the Westtown Thornton Road property to Jarvis Mason on January 30th, 1879, less than a month before he and Eliza sold it to Sproat. This sheriff's deed does not include a recital clause, citing how Otto C. Vezin acquired the property before losing it through sheriff's sale. So it's quite fortuitous that we found it in the subsequent deed. There you go. Because sheriff's deeds record the sale of real estate at public auction, notice had to be given to the public, so it's wise to check newspapers from the time of the sale. Since the notice functioned as an advertisement of sorts, it was written to attract potential buyers, giving a detailed description of the property at the time of the sale. We learn that in 1879, the house was a two-storied, large stone dwelling with a mansard roof, built in the modern style. The notice also identifies the size and location of the property and confirms the name of the person from whom the property was seized and taken in execution, Otto C. Vezin. With that clue, we can search for additional archives records. It seems that, like Joseph Few's many creditors, Otto owed a lot of workmen for the ambitious renovations undertaken at the Thornbury Township property. An exploration of the archive's mechanics liens reveals some of the changes that Otto made to the home. John D. Worth, a lumber contractor, was owed almost $1,300 in 1868. The relative worth of those dollars spent on a construction project would equal over $500,000 today. And that is only one of several workmen's claims against Otto Vezin in the archives records. So what did Otto build? One new barn, as well as renovations to the old barn that included new weatherboarding, a new roof, a newly attached shed, as well as a new ice house and a new wraparound porch. Historic maps like the Brio's Farm Atlas and the Whitmer Atlas, as shown here, as well as road papers held at the archives, can provide researchers with further information about the location of houses and buildings in relation to one another. In the inset is an illustration from a road paper showing the property before Otto Vezin's purchase. Although sheriff's deeds were kept by the Prothonotary until 1905, they've only been indexed through 1875. However, the deed books have been digitized and are available for remote research through the archive's Laserfiche portal. So if you encounter a sheriff's deed in your property research, you can access them via the archive's webpage. You can access the Laserfiche portal two ways. first by clicking on the Digitized Records button on any of the archive's web pages, or second, when you have located a record that you would like to view, then click on the Digitized Records tab within a specific record group. As Maureen mentioned, execution dockets allow researchers to identify key pieces of information involved in a debt case. Similar to the appearance dockets, execution dockets have both an index and an adverse index, and will provide the names of a plaintiff and defendant, as well as the court term and the number assigned to the execution. This page from an execution docket illustrates how the assigned case number corresponds to the related execution papers, just as we saw with Joseph Few. Once a property was seized and sold, researchers can learn more by exploring a related record group, sheriff's sales dockets, which are available on the Laserfiche portal. These real estate sales dockets are the sheriff's documentation of sheriff sales and can be used to learn more about properties sold via sheriff's sale. Shown here is an example from a sheriff's real estate sales docket for a property that was seized from R. Warren King in 1906. It's likely that researchers will find a newspaper clipping in these real estate sales dockets. And just as with the Thornberry house, this notice describes the property. And as seen here, it also gives a physical street address for this property in the Phoenixville borough, 373 Washington Avenue. A Sanborn fire map from the same year provides a 2D representation of the 2.5-story frame house and frame stable mentioned in the notice. So aside from the tie-in to all things spooky in October, why did we choose to cover Inquisitions and executions for this program? For property researchers, navigating sheriff sales when creating a chain of title can be challenging. Furthermore, civil court records can be overlooked when researching. However, civil court records may contain a wealth of information and can be a first step into understanding the circumstances behind a record at the archives. As we saw with Joseph Few, Otto Vezin, and R. Warren King, Inquisitions and executions, when combined with other records, may even give you a clearer idea about a particular property and perhaps even family history. To gain a better understanding of the legal terms and learn more about some of the records we highlighted, we recommend that researchers consult the Archives Guide to the Records of the Court of Common Pleas. Researchers can access a PDF version by clicking on either of the hyperlinks under Civil Court and Debt-Related Records. Another helpful resource to consult is an early edition of Black's Law Dictionary. The Archives is open for walk-ins Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Please feel free to stop by, to call, or email us. If you can't visit in person, we also offer Ask an Archivist, which is a 30-minute virtual reference consultation with either me or with Maureen. And now I'm going to take off my video and we're going to open the questions to you, or open the floor to you for any questions. Do we have any chats, Maureen?
We did not have any chats.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to drop questions they have now, we can read them off. Okay, so we have a question from Skip. When did debtor's prison expire?
That is something that I do not know off the top of my head. That would be probably a Pennsylvania state law. Skip, we can do some digging into that via some of our law books and get back to you about that. I know there was material change in the way that they were affecting, I'm sorry, the material change in affecting the way that the people were prosecuted and then punished, particularly in the quarter sessions. That's more where I tend to have my expertise as far as information. But for that, Skip, I'm not quite sure. I'd have to get back to you on that. Okay, we have a few other questions, guys. Okay. So let's go in order here. Cindy, can you type a name without knowing where to start to guide me where to look? So yes, we would recommend that you would start you could start in the narratives, you could start in the deeds, you could start in the debt and civil court and debt related records on the archives website. So just go to some of those subject headings. If you are on a Windows compatible machine, you can hit the Control F to search by name, or if you're using a Mac product, you can do Command F. So that will help you to search the records without having to scroll through all of them. Kathy,
and all of our,
go ahead.
sorry, all of our indexes are organized alphabetically by surname. So if you are looking for a specific person, like Stacey mentioned, you can find them that way too.
And I might also recommend having a very broad search or thinking of alternate spellings, since spelling change was mainly phonetic early on. So, you know, if the last name, we just saw one this morning that was Fitzpatrick, that was actually started with a P. So if you're looking under Fitzpatrick and if it's an F, you may want to also just think of alternate phonetic spellings for that last name. Indentured servants, that we would have some. We have indentured servant complaints, so that would be a separate set of indexes under, I believe it's servant and slavery records on the archives website. We did a program about that last June that you can access through our YouTube that briefly touches on it, and but there is also an information tab for those.
And funnily enough, we did have Joseph Few was brought to court because he did have an indentured servant who ran away. So in cases where in that case we do see in the Court of Common Pleas or the early courts, when an indentured servant runs away and breaks their contract, you can see that in our records.
That's a good point. And I forgot about Margaret of Joseph.
Yeah.
Sandy asked, when the husband died, was the wife liable for his debts, or did the court sell his holdings to pay off his debts? So the wife, that's where the administrator would be appointed and then held liable. Typically, it wasn't the female early on. But she would be affected certainly by her husband's debts. Let's see. Patricia, why did the sheriff sales in the deed books not refer to earlier deed books? Yes, so it was just the function. Sometimes you can come upon it. That's where if the sheriff's we do have an index for a very certain amount of time where it does give you the former owner's index or an index of former owners. So that would be something to check, but then also just looking through the deed indexes for the name of the previous owner. but you would be using those deeds in conjunction. If you see sheriff's sale, you're going to know to want to check some of these common pleas records. How were property records initiated when William Penn took over? So that would be the Penn proprietary government, and they were the sellers, so to speak, of the first real estate. All of those records are held by the state archives. So the survey that Maureen shared was cited as the state archives. You would go to the state archives. They have some old rights indexes for Chester County. You can search by last name. Kathy, it was last June we did the servant and slavery. It was mainly this it was for Juneteenth, right, Maureen? I believe.
Yep, yeah.
And we just touched on the indentured servants as being part of, but that slavery and indentured servant program was June of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we'll give it one more moment, but thank you all for attending. I know that this was quite a deep dive into a very specific set of records, but we really enjoyed bringing it to you. So thank you so much for coming, and please feel free to reach out to us to CC Archives, the email where we sent the link, with any further questions.
And I'll also jump in.
Oh.
We just have a survey to fill out for everyone to give your feedback. So I'll also drop that in the chat now.
Thank you, Maureen.
Of course. But thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everyone.